Thank you. You're right. You got the right Windsor. We don't have a castle. Okay, so we're here to talk about redesigning frontline government services, and I heard a lot today that's very comparable to what we're doing in Canada. I'm going to talk a lot more about what we're doing behind the scenes to make sure that the services, when we do launch them, are successful and can be replicated as we move forward. So we're going to leave time, so Billy and I each got 10 minutes, and then hopefully we got lots of time for questions, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation after. So I'll try and go through this stuff quickly and try and drive a little bit of thought. I heard a lot of talk today about channels, and what we're trying to consider is forget about the channels. If you design good digital services, they should work in any channel. So you design it right, and then you should be able to implement it across all your channels. And forget about e-pretend. We do a lot of e-pretend. If anyone doesn't know what I mean by that, it's launching something online that looks really nice to the public, but behind the scenes it's the same old crappy process that we've been doing forever. So we want to forget about doing e-pretend. Don't waste your time on it. Focus on doing it right. So I'm going to talk mostly about the building blocks. Make sure you're building a good, strong foundation behind the scenes so that it works and it's transferable. And focus on the people. That's the most important part, and I've heard a lot of that today. So the building blocks I'm going to talk about, you heard Martin's mission or statement this morning. We have a very similar one, and that's creating a best-in-class digital government for Canadians. And behind the scenes, we have a lot of parallel projects going on right now. First one being about trust and identity, and that's some work called DIAC that I'll talk a little bit about. A trust framework and a trust mark, so that's basically the logo that people will see when they use one of these services so they know that it's a trusted service. The ability to share information. So what we're looking at is not just an individual city or a province or federal government service. We're talking about building digital services so that they'll work in any city, in any province, and across the government, all levels of government. So that sharing of information, because people move, is critically important to how this all works. And it has to be secure, obviously. So DIAC is the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. It's made up of public sector and private sector, so people like the banks, credit card companies, insurance companies, the big telecom, plus all levels of government basically working together to create our identification and authentication protocols. This particular document's available if you want more information about that. You can download it online. Trusted digital identity consists of basically these components. So you have to know, I am the person I say I am. I've given consent to use my information, and we've heard talk about that in the previous presentations. Consent is critically important. A lot of work going on the policy side. We have privacy policies comparable to yours. And we've got to make sure those policies reflect the ability to do good digital services. So we've got to have that consent. We've got to know that we can use your information across a variety of services as you say, as you want it. So it's always about the citizen. So the Digital Interchange, CDI, Canada's Digital Interchange, is built on our old vital stats information, so vital stats being birth registration, death registration. So we've had a process in place for a long time on how do all the people who need to know when someone's born and when someone dies, when that information gets to all the people who need to know that information. So we're redesigning that service so that it can now be used for any other bit of information about that citizen that we can share it across levels of government. So this is a fundamental piece that has to basically work in order for all of these to fall together. And these are the three components of the Canada's Digital Interchange. So you need to be able to validate a piece of information. If someone says who they are, you have to be able to validate that across levels of government. You have to be able to notify all those people who need that information, and you have to be able to retrieve. So you have an authoritative source of information. You need to be able to retrieve that information from wherever that authoritative source is and use it for the service you're now trying to offer. So this is just a very quick overview of, you have the people who are registering the information, and then you have all the people who need the information and redefining that process. In the old way, there was all kinds of lines going to all these different people, all kinds of manual processes. Now it's one line, and everything gets disseminated to those who need it, when they need it. So just one example of how it all comes together. Martin talked earlier about complex processes. I think this qualifies as a truly online complex process. So the Civil Resolution Tribunal, this is in one of our provinces, British Columbia. This is in a ready-to-go state, so basically we'll call it a beta state, and soon to be launched. The Civil Resolution Tribunal is basically for condominium owners, how you resolve disputes. So between condominium boards, so the boards of people who set the rules around condominiums, and the people who own the condominiums. If you have a problem, the process right now is incredibly complicated. The laws are complex. It's basically a part of the justice system that has significantly high volumes, and the duration it takes to get through the process right now in the 12 to 15 month range. And this is a service that's ready to be launched where the entire process can be done digitally. So it's part of the justice system. It basically allows you to resolve issues between the owners, and it brings the justice system to the public. So it takes an incredibly complex process that if you're the condo owner and you have an issue, understanding all the rules generally requires you to go out and get a lawyer to interpret the rules. You have the option of going to the condominium board and taking their word for how the rules are to be interpreted, or you have to go get a lawyer to figure out, how is it going to work for you. It's basically, you can see the different things that can be enforced through the Civil Resolution Tribunal. So the bylaws, the legislation, fees and fines can all be done. And at the beginning of the process, it's a very high volume of people just trying to find out what are the rules and where do I stand? Do I actually have something to move forward with? This process gives you full access to everything you need to know. Ask, through simple wikis and find the information you need to figure out, do I have a case to move forward? And then you can make the decision. You have real access to lawyers on the back end who will answer all your questions, help you through the process. And if you decide that you're going to, they can actually do one-on-one negotiations between the parties. That can all happen through the process. And if that doesn't work things out, you decide you have a case, full case management online. And if you actually then go to the tribunal, the entire process, the tribunal review, your results, all happen with you not needing to leave your home. So a very good example of, I think, meets Martin's standards for what a complex process is, and this should be going live very soon. So truly digital service, I had to work a kilt in here somewhere, is you basically have to start from the beginning. This is hard work. There's a lot of heavy lifting. That Civil Resolution Tribunal, you're looking at 7-8 years worth of rules changes and all the things that had to be put into place before we could launch that. But I'll stop there and turn it over to Billy.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And yeah, I've got to say a special thanks to Alison for using up all of those Lord of the Rings metaphors that I, as a New Zealander, may feel somewhat entitled to, has to be said. And I should start by saying that if there are any spot prizes at this event for perhaps the most miles travelled to this event, I would be the winner, so I'll be happily picking that up this afternoon. And it's good to be up here with Harry as well. Canada and New Zealand are recognised as being two of the most polite nations on the planet. And normally that wouldn't be a bad thing, but we've just spent the last 24 hours saying, after you, No, after you. And it's good to get it resolved. Thank you for that, by the way. And I'd also like to say thanks to Socitm for inviting me here today. It is something of an honour and a privilege, to be honest, as a freshly minted, if you like, president of ALGIM. As it happens, I'm here on slightly false pretenses because it's actually, I'm here with my wife and we're on our honeymoon. And if she had any doubts about marrying me in the first place, I'm sure those doubts will be laid to rest tonight when I treat her to the Socitm Awards dinner here in glorious Milton Keynes. But just to put things a little bit in perspective from a New Zealand point of view, for those of you who may not be familiar with the country, it's an awful long way away, as I say. It's roughly the same size as the UK, but we only have 4.5 million citizens. And a third of those are in our main city of Auckland, which is in the North Island. And it, by definition of its size, Auckland gets an awful lot of emphasis. It's constrained by geography. Roading is a problem, housing is a problem, commuting is a problem, and so the provinces where I live are kind of left out. There are 78 councils in New Zealand, and as a country we are geographically challenged. As I'm sure some parts of your country are, getting to, say from one end of my county to another is about a 6-hour drive, and it's not that big. It's just the geography that causes the issues. But enough about that. The digital customer. In New Zealand, by the way, I'm not going to stand here and say that New Zealand is a wonderful country digitally. We have the same issues that everybody else has, and I fear that we are probably a little bit behind in some respects. Typically, New Zealand is considered quite an innovative country because of our isolation, I suppose. And as councils, we kind of look to some of our innovative organisations for inspiration. But the world out there is changing, and that's no surprise to you. And there's a whole new generation of digital natives coming in to our organisations. As an older person, and I'm quite happy to admit that, I was thinking back in the 70s, change to me was changing from black and white TV to colour. And that's kind of about the only thing I can think of in the 70s that kind of really excited me in this sense. But as I'm sure some of you younger people will be aware, things have changed very, very rapidly over the last 20 years. And we have a lot more power, storage, connectivity available than we've ever had in the past. And I have absolutely no doubt that that will continue in the future. And there are many trends happening in New Zealand. One of them, here's a picture of a little pop-up facility that just popped up in a car park one day. It's a bank. And perhaps I should say that banks, perhaps in New Zealand, may not be the best example to use because they are actually disappearing from our small towns at a remarkable rate. Not surprisingly, because no one goes into them anymore, or should I say very few people go in, but it's actually quite a challenge at the same time for the older generation who now have to drive an hour to the nearest bank. So I'm going to sort of temper the rest of what I say by saying that there's sometimes the change shouldn't be there for a change itself, I suppose. One of the reasons I brought this up is because pop-up councils are kind of happening a little bit in New Zealand for community engagement purposes and starting to slowly occur a little bit more frequently. For instance, at community meetings that we might have in order to talk about local issues, there is a possibility of popping up a rates counter. People come along, talk about their issue, pay their rates or their property taxes, I'm sorry, I'm not sure of the terminology here, at the same time. And one of the innovative companies that we have in New Zealand is Air New Zealand. Pound for pound, it's probably one of the most profitable airlines in the world. And it's done that by innovating, and like I said, councils like ourselves look to Air New Zealand for some thought leadership in this area. And here's a couple of things that have happened in Air New Zealand in recent times that might give us some reason to think. The first picture is of their wristband tracker. If you have a small child that you are sending to some far-flung country, or even, well, in New Zealand, every country's far-flung, to be honest. Oh! Oh, there's the surprise. Oh, I beg your pardon. Where are we up to? Hooray! I beg your pardon. Wristband trackers. That's thrown me off, hasn't it? Wristband trackers for tracking your child if they're flying alone. You can keep an eye on where they are at any given time, contact the person who's been charged with looking after them, and know when they've arrived safely. The second one is simply notification of, hey, if they're making a coffee for you in the Cairo Lounge, and when it's ready they'll let you know. 20 minutes before your flight's due to leave, they'll tell you what gate to go to, and if there are any delays. How about that? And they said I couldn't learn. The online council should be thinking something similar, 24/7. We're kind of there, sort of. Harry talked about, what did you call it, e-pretense or something like that. There is still quite a lot of that happening in New Zealand. There is a lot more citizen engagement in social media, crowdsourcing, online transactions, but we still have quite a ways to go, I think, in order to join up all these components. I've just learned there's a screen down there too. It's hidden by this bit of paper. It's, oh, I'm a curse, aren't I? Okay. A lot of our organisations, I'm sure you're familiar with them, have fix-it apps and various apps for services and things throughout your organisations. The ones here, or three of them, show a park app for the Palmerston North City Council. Where's the park? What services has it got? Is there parking nearby? How do I get there? And I think that can be actually driven towards an awful lot of other services that councils have. And one of the things we've seen in New Zealand, and I'm absolutely sure the same thing happened here, was the sudden influx of Pokemon Go users in parks. And I can't help but wonder whether that couldn't be modified to provide even more information about the park in order to give the user something more of an experience while they're there. Now I have to be careful about this next slide because this comes from Brimbank City, and I happen to know that there's somebody in the audience from Brimbank here. Brimbank is in Australia, by the way, so I've sort of cobbled this information from them without knowing that there was going to be someone here. So I won't say too much about it in case there are tricky questions. But likewise, there are, they have done some wonderful work in some of the applications they have. This application, you know, do you want to go for a swim? Do you want to go to a gym? Where do I find this? And these are just starting points, I think, for councils. They need to start to add greater value and deliver new services such as, you know, how do I book a lane? How do I book a lesson at the pool? What's the water temperature? And how crowded is the pool? Where can I park? I can't get away with without putting a thing in here about drones and service delivery. I mean, drones are being used for an awful lot of smaller services now, inspections and weed spraying, emergency services. But I also wanted to talk about automated service vehicles as part of this as well. And not just in terms of emergency services, but what about parks that are mowed at night by automated vehicles? What about collection trucks that go around at night and pick up all the rubbish. These are more digital enabled services. And while banks, one aspect of redesigning frontline services is changing where councils are delivered from, and there's absolutely no reason why we have to deliver them from an office somewhere. Why not put them in shopping malls as part of other services? And I'll quickly race through the last few. Talk about the omni-channel. Harry kind of touched on this as well. All of these channels need to be folded together so that it's seamless to the user. Every aspect of local government is on the move to a more mobile world. Our inspectors and consents managers are using mobile devices, and parking wardens respond to breaches that are notified to them by devices on the street. And why not have remote contact centre agents? I'm not suggesting they start walking the streets, but why not have them in some of the other buildings that we manage? I'll quickly go over the next couple too. Business intelligence. A lot of this is going to be driven by how much information we collect, so that we understand better what people are doing. And so that we can manage the customer journey, if you like. But I'm going to stop on this slide here. Although it's all very well for us to be making things more digital, I don't think we should be forgetting the human aspect of that. And I've got a perfect example to you. In booking this trip here, we booked 3 rental cars that we needed whilst we were touring the UK. And along the way, we discovered that one aspect of it was incorrect, and try as we might, we couldn't fix it online. And in the end, my wife actually got on the phone, phoned the rental car here in the UK. For my part, I have to say, I was probably preparing for the trip by studying the culture and customs of this country by watching a Coronation Street omnibus. But she got on the phone, spoke to somebody for about 90 minutes, sorted the whole thing out, and they completely reorganised the rental car agreements that we had, got rid of some of the one-way fees, gave us discounts because we were doing multiple hires, and basically improved the service. And we could not have done that online. So I don't think we need to forget about the human side of things. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. Apologies for the mishap at the beginning. Thank you.
From the floor. If not, while you are mulling that over, if I can maybe start with you, Harry, and ask a question. You've mentioned some really important building blocks for digital government. We call it government as a platform and that kind of concept. Here, you've said you can't just have e-pretend. What you're describing sounds really, really hard if you're moving from traditional siloed organisations, siloed IT, siloed data. How have you gone to what you described from an old world, which I assume may have had many of the difficulties that we hear about in the UK and New Zealand?
Yes, it is very hard. So just on the identity management piece that I talked about that, we have this Public Sector CIO Council, so that's Catherine from the City of Toronto who's here and myself sit on there representing municipalities, but it's all the provinces and the federal government sitting around the table talking about these things so that we do it the same way across the country. We've been having that conversation since 2000. So these are not easy conversations, and of course everyone has their idea on how they should be done, but when you're trying to do it the same across jurisdictions, it makes it even more challenging.
I bet. And Billy, I mean, you can give us plenty of advice on how to court a lady and bring her to the Socitm annual conference, but in terms of your experiences of coming here, hearing about some of the UK context, is there any sort of one bit of advice you would give to this audience, to a UK audience, based on what you found works really well or what hasn't worked well in New Zealand?
One of the things we still struggle with is, as Harry mentioned again, is the cross-boundary stuff. And I think there is a huge opportunity in New Zealand for us to be working a lot better together. And from the discussions I've had, not just here today, but with the other international people over the last few days, I'm encouraged, I suppose, by the fact that that seems to be happening more and more. And I think that's one of the things that certainly learned here, is that there is some real opportunity for collaboration at quite a high level.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Yes, gentleman at the back on that side. Microphone is coming to you. And as usual, just name, organisation and a brief question, please.
Steve Matheson, I'm a journalist. It's a question for Harry Turnbull. Are there other digitising processes, for legal processes, that are coming through the pipeline? And what took the 7 to 8 years on the CRT work? Was it the sort of digitisation work, or was it more about changing processes and laws?
I'm getting a bit of echo. Can you repeat that?
So, sorry, the question was, why did it take so long for to put in place that process, and also are there other types which would involve that sort of legal application as well as the case study you mentioned?
Okay, so why did it take so long? That's a very good question. So egos is a big part of it. Getting people to agree on the right way to do it was probably the bulk. And then there's all of the policy, the privacy legislation, the procurement rules, everything that has to be amended in order to provide true digital services. So the policy changes themselves are really time-consuming and can take a long time to get the buy-in from those people who will then move those policy changes forward. Other examples, the one that I gave is probably the closest to what I would call a complex service. There's a lot of examples where easier transactions, driver's license, health card, renewals. Well, one of the good ones where you talk about, when I talk about forget about the channel, is proof of age when buying alcohol. So that's an over-the-counter transaction where people have access to your personal information that they have no right to. So your name, your address, your date of birth. They have no right to know that. All they have a right to know is that you're old enough to buy alcohol. So that's one of the proof of concepts that's very close to launching as well, is where through their contactless tap at the liquor store, it just shows up with a photo of the person and a check mark saying, yes, they're old enough to buy alcohol. So, and that would be an easier transaction, and there's lots of examples like that.
Look forward to hearing more when you come back and tell us about those in future. For now, I'm afraid we're out of time for this session, but Harry, are you joining us this evening as well?
I will be.
You will be. In that case, these two speakers are definitely going to be around for the rest of the evening. If you've got further questions, please do grab them later. But for now, please give them both a big round of applause.